Dear colleagues, welcome to this veterinary medicines work stream of the training, and welcome back to who was already connected before. So this afternoon we'll have two parallel work streams, one on human medicines and the other one on veterinary medicines. As the veterinary work stream where we are in is concerned, we'll have two webinars. The first one on the veterinary medicinal products regulation, the second one on the maximum residue limits. So we'll start now with the veterinary medicinal product regulation. For this, we have a very distinguished speaker, my colleague Barbara Freischem. I hope I have pronounced it correctly. Yes, she's nodding. She's the head of the here at EMA of the Department of Veterinary Surveillance and Regulatory Support. Thank you, Barbara, for supporting this event. I will give the floor to her in a second, but before, let me remind everyone again that any question can be asked during the presentation through the chat box in the WebEx application, and we will, and Barbara, of course, will ask any question when during the presentation. So with this, I think I'm not wasting any more time. I will give the floor to Barbara for the presentation. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Riccardo, for the introduction. And thank you very much to the participants for being here. And I hope my presentation is going to be of interest to you. I shall try to make breaks so you can ask questions, but I understand you're also proficient users of the chat box, so I will take the questions that I see coming in through the chat box during my presentation, and if there should be any question I can't answer during this presentation, I will strive to answer it on a one-on-one basis by email after today's session. In today's session, I will focus on the veterinary medicinal products regulation. The official short name is Regulation EU 2019/6. I will also give a brief overview over the current system, really brief. But after January 2022, which is not so far away, the new regulation or the regulation will apply. And I will highlight the intents of the legislation, key changes in requirements, and what we at the agency do to implement these changes. So just having a brief look at the current system, I trust you're all aware that the basic legislation of regulating veterinary medicines in the EU consists of a directive that sets out the basic requirements on how medicines should be authorized and also determines national marketing authorization procedures. And then we have the regulation 726 of 2004 that sets up the agency and the central marketing authorizations. Under the national marketing authorizations, we have the purely national authorizations and the decentralized system with or mutual recognition system where more than one member state is involved in the assessment and then consequently in the authorization of the medicines. But even under the decentralized and mutual recognition system, the resulting authorizations from the assessment and national authorizations. There are mostly shared basic requirements for the central system and the national system. And as I mentioned before, those are laid down in the directive, and that includes the data required for authorization, the fact that renewals are required, and for the monitoring of the safety of authorized products, the reliance on periodic safety update reports. I think that's all the time I'd like to spend on the current system. And in my presentation on the veterinary medicinal product regulation, I will focus on the key changes and then on the implementation of the IT requirements, which is result in the veterinary medicinal product regulation program. That really focuses on the IT changes, but you will see it throughout my presentation. So the veterinary medicinal products regulation has a number of key purposes and really should be seen within the Commission's initiative for better regulation in the EU. It is replacing the directive, and it's also and part of the regulation in that it provides uniform rules for the authorization of veterinary medicines in the agency. Its aim is to provide for a modern, innovative, and fit-for-purpose legal framework. It's intending to incentivize innovation, also in veterinary medicines. It gives incentives to increase availability of veterinary medicines, which has been a problem in the past. And last but not least, it recognizes the link between animal health and public health, and it strengthens the EU action to address antimicrobial resistance. I didn't list it on this slide, but it's mentioned throughout the recitals outlining the purpose of the regulation. Another intention is also to reduce regulatory burden, both for national competent authorities, but of course also for the industry. And I will come back to that later in my presentation. We have tight deadlines to get done with the implementation of the regulation. It was approved late in December 2018, published early in January 2019, and it becomes applicable in January 2022. Now, 3 years sound like a lot, but actually there is a lot to do. So, and time is going by fast. One of the key issues where this regulation differs from the previous regulatory framework is that it outlines the overall rules, but it doesn't set down every little detail. So it actually provides for a significant number of further implementing legislation in the form of delegated and implementing acts. In order to develop those acts, the European Commission is actually looking towards the agency to provide scientific feedback on what would be necessary to be addressed by regulation and what not. Now, as I mentioned, the regulation now addresses also the national marketing authorizations and no longer only the centralized system. So the way we are addressing it at the European Medicines Agency is that on request from the European Commission, we will provide scientific advice on the content of subsequent legislation. With the help of the member states, we are actually setting up specific expert groups that develop the scientific advice. And these expert groups consist of experts that are mostly recommended from the heads of the national competent agencies. The final scientific advice is adopted through the agency structure, so through the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products, but the grunt work in developing the scientific recommendations is done basically with input from the member states experts. Now, it's a very special situation from the work the agency normally does. Normally, we develop guidelines on account of our own procedures. Here, we respond to the European Commission, and the European Commission takes our advice and develops the implementing legislation. For that particular reason, the agency doesn't consult on the advices that we actually provide. It's something that is then done by the European Commission in the process of developing the further regulation. I shall go to the next slide because that actually shows you what I was just telling you. The implementing legislation really provides for 20 implementing and delegated acts, and that's a number that is unusually high from what we've seen on the veterinary side before. We at the agency give the scientific recommendations. The stakeholder consultation will not take place at the agency, but the stakeholders will be consulted on the draft delegated and implementing acts that the Commission then drafts on the basis of the scientific input from the agency. How many mandates have we received so far? So basically, we received 2 lots so far, staggered in the order of importance and how long it will take to develop the subsequent legislation. The revision of the Annex 2, so the detailed requirements of the documentation to accompany an application for marketing authorization was one of the first ones sent to us, and the agency delivered the recommendations last year at the end of August. The same applies to many of the other mandates. The requirements for the collection of data on antimicrobials used in animals, for instance, and these first 2 are delegated acts, which is a different adoption procedure in the Commission, and especially also the data collection on antimicrobials has a further implementing act attached to it. The list of variations not requiring assessment was another one, and for that one we heard that last week, I think, the implementing act was actually adopted. Key to our work at the agency, and therefore in the center of this list, is the implementing act on the Union products database. That is one of the new requirements in the legislation, and I will come back to it later. I mentioned the criteria, no, I didn't mention the criteria to designate antimicrobials to be reserved for human use is another key implementing act, and that was discussed yesterday and hopefully will be adopted in the next few days. Pharmacovigilance system master file and measures on good pharmacovigilance practice were other acts where we had a little bit longer to develop the input but the scientific advice for all was delivered on time, and for the last two in May of this year. Now, we then received a second, may I say, batch of mandates for the provision of scientific recommendations, and that relates to the rules on veterinary medicinal products for oral administration. The veterinary medicinal products regulation was not adopted in splendid isolation. At the same time, there was another regulation that looked at medicated feed and better regulation of that. That's Regulation EU 2019/4. And then there is the Regulation 2019/5 that was adopted to change the core responsibilities of the agencies in view of Regulation 2016. Now, I see that a question came in why a transition from directive to regulation was made. I suppose the reason is one does not have to translate a regulation into national legislation. It is directly applicable the way it is published by the Commission. And therefore, again, it makes for easier regulation and reduction of regulatory burden, and also more streamlined regulation across the EU.
Barbara, there is also another question on how to transpose central marketing authorization of veterinary medicinal products in the EU to third countries, in which laws there isn't possibility for that procedure. I don't know if you want to answer, or otherwise I can remind something that we have been talking about yesterday that could help with this.
Why don't you remind the group of what you've been talking about yesterday? Unfortunately, I couldn't attend, so I missed that bit.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I will go ahead, and you, of course, can complement when I finished. But of course, transposition of a central marketing authorization to a country outside the EU has to be this country national authority decision. Its laws and procedures has to allow for it. What I can say, and that's what I was referring before, is that EMA is always happy, favorable to share unredacted assessment report with regulators outside the European Union. Of course, this has to be done with the consent of the company, which is the applicant or marketing authorization holder. But from the EMA point of view, there is no objection to share unredacted assessment reports. So if a company, a market authorization holder in Europe, wants to extend the market authorization to a country outside the European Union, they can, with the EMA consent, share the assessment report that was used for the centralized authorization.
I hope that helps the person who asked the question. As long as you're not part of the European Union, you may opt in, or you may, I think the answer was sufficient, so I'll not add on to that. Going back to my slide, two advices were provided by the agency, but actually not through CVMP, and those are the advices on good distribution practice for veterinary medicinal products and for their active substances. But very much back to the work of my department, the format for data to be collected on antimicrobials used in animals, and that's sales as well as use data. and also the establishment of a list of antimicrobials to be reserved for human use based on the criteria set out in the previous advice on criteria to establish such a list. Now, this is going to be a critical piece of scientific advice, because it also has trade impact for countries outside the EU. I see another question about variations of marketing authorizations. I think there is actually in the third box a list of variations not requiring assessment. So this is going to be a major change. The agency was asked to give a recommendation on a list of variations to the terms of a marketing authorization that do not require assessment. They are currently handled under a very, very short procedure under the existing system, but in the future, there will be absolutely no assessment to that. Potentially only checking by the by whoever received the variation on whether it fulfilled the criteria for a variation not requiring assessment or not. And actually, the aim of the variations not requiring assessment is that the marketing authorization holders can record the change in the union product database. So going back to your question, yes, regulatory authorities will always be informed of all the changes to the terms of a marketing authorization, and if changes to the dossier of veterinary medicinal products are concerned, the current standing is that actually these changes will be submitted. There may be cases where some of the information might be held on site by the marketing authorization holder. That was, for instance, discussed in relation to the Pharmacovigilance system master file. But again, any critical information that's part of the dossier needs to be updated according to the current discussion. I trust that helps. So definitely, regulatory authorities will always know what has been changed in which dossier. Right, going back to my slides. If you're interested on the implementing legislation that's being developed in relation to the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation, and here you still see the old acronym that we used in the agency. We called it a new veterinary regulation, but it's not so new any longer, so it's now the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation. This is the link, and all the mandates that we receive, all the advices that we provide to the Commission, and other relevant updates like adoption of the related implementing or delegated acts are published on that website as they become available. Are there any other questions on this section at this point in time? No, I will continue that then, and if there are more questions, just pop them in the chat box. It's really important to keep in mind that the aim of the legislation is on better regulation in veterinary medicine. So the question came in whether I could give more information on the Union Product Database and the Pharmacovigilance Database. And that will be the second part of my presentation. So I would like to invite you to be a bit patient, and I will get to it then, and hope I can answer all your questions then. So it's you can look at it at better availability, better accessibility, reducing risks, and encouraging surveillance of the safety of authorized medicines. With regard to better availability, this new framework really aims to stimulate innovation for new medicines. It increases the flexibility of the prescription cascade, basically the allowed use of human and veterinary medicines outside the terms of their proper marketing authorizations to treat diseases in animals for which there is no appropriate treatment. It makes it easier to import medicines from other EU member states. Prescriptions are valid throughout the EU. And it facilitates online sales for certified online pharmacies for non-prescription medicines, among other things, by the introduction of a standardized logo for certified pharmacies. And that was one of the acts that were recently adopted. So we are making progress, and the end result should be easier access to more treatment options. Accessible information, and maybe that goes into answering the question of Yelena. The Union Product Database will provide information on all veterinary medicines authorized in any EU member state to the general public. So one does not have to be a veterinarian to consult the Union Product Database on what products are authorized where, which ingredients they have, and a number of other pertinent information fields. The information includes, but is not limited to, name of the product, active substance, strength of the product. The information that is publicly accessible will include the summary of the product characteristics, including the package leaflet and labeling. It will also include public assessment reports that give even more background on the scientific evaluation of the product and of the content of the SPC. It will include dates of placing on the market in a member state, and it will also include information on the availability for each veterinary medicinal product. So in addition to increased availability, we hope or we aim for easier access to information about treatment options. Reducing risk, the risk of antimicrobial resistance. Now, this is a specific goal, not only not restricted to the EU, but part of the specific EU actions are that at the topmost levels, the most restrictive level, certain antimicrobials can be reserved for human use. And by the end of January next year, we will actually deliver the scientific advice on which antimicrobials those should be in the view of the experts we're working with at the EMA. There is the opportunity for further restrictions of specific restrictions of the use of antimicrobials outside the terms of the marketing authorization under the cascade. And at the agency, we're also working on which substances should carry additional restrictions. The regulation itself prohibits preventative use and metaphylactic use. So animals probably infected but not displaying signs yet is only allowed under certain conditions. Member states are required to collect information, firstly, on the sales of antimicrobials. Member states currently already collect information on the sales of antibacterials in the EU, but that will be extended to also cover antivirals, antifungals, and eventually antiparasitics. And initially, the collection of information on the use of antimicrobials will focus on farm animals, but that will later be extended to companion animals. It's a phased implementation, recognizing the significant amount of work that member states will need to do to set up such systems. And again, already regulated at the level of the regulation, imported animals and produce need to comply with the EU rules, which makes sense, but definitely has trade impact. Okay, I have a question. What will be the role of countries outside the EU and the EEA in the specific rules to fight antimicrobial resistance? I think consultation, as for the other scientific advices provided by the agency, will take place at the Commission level on that. I already participated in one of the information sessions that the Commission held at the beginning of this year, and I understand that further information sessions will be planned. But information and participation are two different things. So, of course, the EU Commission will listen to the feedback and adjust its legislative decision-making to what's heard in the feedback. So your permanent representations or your country representations in Brussels should probably reach out to Dr. Sabine Jülicher at the European Commission to register any interest in this discussion, and I'm sure you will then be invited to future meetings where the measures pertaining to antimicrobials will be discussed. I hope that's helpful. The next one, encouraging pharmacovigilance reporting. That's actually a big change and a big chunk of the new regulation. So the aim of the regulation is to improve how the reporting of adverse effects of authorized medicines works in Europe. And of course, animals are, well, when there are side effects in animals, the owners react slightly differently to when they experience side effects themselves. Some owners will diligently report, other owners, especially in large production systems, will take it up with their veterinarians. So the overall aim of the regulation is to improve the reporting system, but also in order to reduce regulatory burden, make it easier between companies and regulatory authorities. So a number of current documents are done away with. So easier information to the outside includes that there will be public access to safety profiles for each product, including incidents of reported adverse events that are broken down by product. and by animal species, type of suspected event, and so on. It will be possible to impose specific requirements on veterinarians in relation to the reporting of adverse events. That's something that national legislation already achieved at this point so far, but now it's really mandated for an EU regulation, and the agency can organize meetings for groups of veterinary healthcare professionals when we identify specific need for collating or analyzing specific pharmacovigilance information. The aim of that is improving the information on the safety profile of authorized medicines and making it publicly available, as well as giving the healthcare professionals, the veterinary healthcare professionals, the opportunity to get involved. That sounds like a lot of work. So on the plus side of that, the regulation also does away with a lot of work, and it reduces, the current system of periodic safety update reports will be replaced by an ongoing monitoring of adverse events that enter the Union Pharmacovigilance database. And companies need to constantly, but at least on a yearly basis, monitor these adverse events for safety signals and confirm through the use of the database to the agency that they have or have not identified a signal. When they have identified a signal, certain actions need to take place. But on the other side, also national competent authorities will have an eye on the adverse events that are reported to the Union Pharmacovigilance database. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that activities related to veterinary medicines really have a significant social and economic relevance, and most of what we do, even if it's aimed at animals, will certainly affect people. And well, COVID-19 is maybe a particularly stark example, but it certainly serves to show the interaction between people or public health and animals. So from a food security aspect, healthy livestock, of course, makes a good start in healthful food production, food safety. You will hear more about the specific MRLs are provided for through MRLs and subsequent withdrawals, setting of withdrawal periods. Prudent use, in particular, of antibiotics is fostered through this regulation with the aim to safeguard antibiotics so that they continue to work for humans. Of course, also animals. Healthy pets have a significant positive effect on human health. And of course, the environment must be protected from harmful substances, which may also be contained in veterinary medicines. And of course, last but not least, animal welfare is being looked after also through the strengthened policy to reduce, refine, or replace animal studies in the authorization of veterinary medicines. Well, I'm not quite certain whether this slide defines the One Health concept, but it could be seen as one take on the One Health concept coming from the point of view of a regulator in veterinary medicines. So But I think the One Health concept is, of course, a lot larger than what's on this slide. I will, in a moment, move into my second part of the presentation, which focuses more on the IT processes that the agency needs to implement. But I would like to ask you to keep in mind that I haven't gone into the detail of all the minute changes that are necessary due to the regulation. But it's important to keep in mind that basically all the EMA internal processes will have to change. The external website of the agency that gives guidance on what companies have to do to submit applications for veterinary medicines has to change, if only to indicate the correct legal basis. Submission pathways have to be adapted because the new regulation mandates that variations without assessment should be recorded by the marketing authorization holder in the union product database. And we already had the pertinent question before, but what about the documentation then? It is provided for in the union product database, but it's a change to the current submission pathway. And we simply have to match up current and future processes, which is a lot of work. And I'm sure you know that very well, because if you intend to join the European Union, you have to do exactly the same thing, match your internal processes to the EU requirements. And of course, one of the things I didn't mention specifically on the slides, but that will be important for us at the agency as well, is that more products can be submitted under the centralized procedure now than ever before. So if the product has not been authorized anywhere in the EU until January 2022, it may, if the company so wishes, be submitted through the central procedure, and that will certainly change the way we have to work at the agency. So the regulation affects member states, the agency, including the CVMP alike. And well, we're doing our best to implement it by the time it's coming into effect. Not supposed to come, it will come into effect then. So I would like to move to the what we call VMP Reg program, Veterinary Medicinal Product Regulation Program. It is a specific agency terminology for a program aimed at improving IT systems. Ricardo, of course, you're quite right. Now is, of course, a point in time to ask for more questions on this. Yes. A concept of pharmacovigilance system master file. They have to be presented to national competent authorities as part of the documentation that is submitted with a marketing authorization application. And what pharmacovigilance system master files do is they describe the system, how the marketing authorization holder will monitor the safety of a given product. It's important to keep in mind that a marketing authorization holder may have more than one pharmacovigilance system, for instance, one for immunologicals and one for pharmaceuticals, but each product can only be related to one pharmacovigilance system, and that is explained in the pharmacovigilance system master file that is related to the marketing authorization application. So changes to the pharmacovigilance system, that's currently under debate, whether they need to be submitted as variations or whether they should be available upon inspections. We do have pharmacovigilance inspections, but those are discussions that are currently ongoing, and the end result will really only be available in January 2022. So I trust that answered your question. And going back to the IT program, I will basically run through those boxes on the right-hand side. First the vision, then the scope, how the governance works, where we are with the projects at this point in time, and last but not least important is the change management, because we at the agency can put in place the IT systems, but the data that need to go in largely come from national competent authorities. So it's important that everybody knows what's required when and how to provide the information. As a small chunk of the veterinary medicinal products regulation, the agency was given the task to develop a number of IT systems required to implement the regulation. And these IT systems will contain data that are important for national competent authorities, veterinary pharmaceutical industry, veterinary healthcare professionals, but also of interest to the general public. These IT systems need to facilitate the revised regulatory procedures. We already had we mentioned the variations not requiring assessment. And of course, I mentioned the advices to support the drafting of the implementing and delegated acts. So now I shall focus on the IT systems. Right, again, the vision of the VMP reg program, again, it is focusing on the IT side of things, is to provide the necessary support to enable the functioning of the veterinary medicinal product relations by ensuring that stable and reliable IT solutions are delivered that allow the implementation of the redrafted regulatory processes. And luckily, because you can do a lot in 3 years, but not everything, the regulation actually also provides for an incremental approach to improving these IT solutions. So it's very clear now that there is a minimum to be delivered at the, in January 2022, but that over time, the IT solutions need to be improved to ensure that all stakeholders' needs are met. I didn't mention it specifically, but of course, with improved information on pharmaceuticals, the IT solutions will also support the functioning of the single market, because you know where a relevant product might be available in the EU, and veterinarians can find the products easier. It will definitely increase transparency, both on authorized products as well as on their side effects to all, including the general public, and it will support the harmonization of veterinary medicinal product information, because the database will be constructed in a way that much of the information is going to be delivered in a structured form. And I mentioned it before, and here it becomes really important. The overall aim of the IT solutions is to reduce administrative burden, both for regulators and for the regulated industry. We aim for entering the information at one entry point and then not having to repeat data entry, which will improve data quality, but also really ensure a good flow of the information through the different interconnected IT systems. There we go. Moving into the scope. The scope of this particular program consists of a number of databases, and some of which you've heard already. The first one is the Union Product Database that will store and make available information on the different types of authorized veterinary medicinal products across the EU. So all national marketing authorizations and all central marketing authorizations. It consists of the Union Pharmacovigilance database, which is basically building on the current system, Ultravigilance Veterinary, and is expanded. And it will also consist of the Union database on manufacturing and wholesale distribution. We already have something in place, but what we also need to make sure of before January 2022 is that all the requirements of the veterinary medicinal products regulation are met in terms of making available information on manufacturing and wholesale distribution across the EU. And last but not least, back again in my responsibilities is the collection of data on sales and on use of antimicrobials in animals. And there are a number of interconnections between those different databases that will need to be delivered. And then, of course, I mentioned it before, all the business processes that are not related to IT also need to be changed within the agency within that particular program. So that's the only exception. The business processes that are not related to IT but agency internal will also be addressed in the scope of this system. Right. How did we envisage the IT systems that we have to deliver? One of the long discussions in the previous years was the development of the SPORE program that focuses on substances, organizations, and referentials, meaning the control terminology that's being used to describe a medicinal product, and when we started the discussions on the Union Product Database, the expert developing the scientific advice on that decided it would be a good idea to build on what's already there, and rather than redo everything from scratch, really make sure that we use what has already been developed. And substance, organization, and referentials are, of course, very important for the Union Product Database, but also for the Union Pharmacovigilance Database, and in the future, also for the Manufacturing and Wholesale Distribution Database. There need to be direct relations between data on antimicrobial sales and use to the Union Product Database. Of course, it doesn't make sense to repeat product-related information, and again, the Union Product Database itself needs to be directly connected to the Union Pharmacovigilance Database, because the public information basically marries product data with data on incidence of side effects, and it marries product data and antimicrobial sales or use data. We have a number of things that are very important and prerequisites to make sure that the complete implementation of the regulation succeeds, but where we as an agency actually have no handle on. And that is the IT solutions in member states. Those are nothing that we have any say over. So we can say we need a specific set of information and we need it in a specific format, but we cannot assess whether the member states' databases fulfill that specific format, whether they even hold the specific data required. And we can, of course, not tell member states what they should do in order to be able to provide that information for the product upload that the regulation requires member states to do. So we design the system with the member states, and with the member states, we decide what should be in and what does not need to be in. But making sure that member states can deliver the information, that's nothing we at the agency can do. The only thing we can do is provide support and training and information. And quality assurance of data prior to submission into the new IT systems, again, we're not the owner of the original data, so it's not part of what we can do. Again, we can advise and support any related processes, but that's about as far as we can go.
Okay, Barbara, just I'm a little bit aware of the time because we have half an hour left. So up to you, but just I wanted to remind you. And for the participants, please ask questions if you need to, if you want to.
Right. I just had another question, so thank you for stopping me. The information that's currently available in UDRA-Pharm probably cannot be used for the union product database. Submission of data into UDRA-Pharm was voluntary. UDRA-Pharm was not connected to the SPORE system, so we may have a slightly different data structure for the new system, and UDRA-Pharm was not necessarily maintained. So there will have to be a new export of current legislation, current information, and then member states need to develop a process for introducing any changes that happen to their nationally authorized products before the go live of the union product database, how to introduce those changes once they have made the initial upload. So, but UDRA-Pharm was an entirely voluntary system, and that not all member states participated in. And again, we have no control over how good the data quality in the current UDRA-Pharm is. The national regulatory authorities from outside the EEA will have the same access to the databases as the general public. So you will have really information to the medicinal products as they're currently authorized or as they are changed over time. But you, at this point in time, it's not foreseen to give other regulatory authorities more access than that. And maybe we can discuss later what sort of information it is that you wish to have access to, because you will, of course, be able to look at the SPCs, you will be able to look at labeling and package leaflets in all the member state languages or in all the relevant languages. So yes, the information will be publicly available, but at the current point in time, there is no distinction foreseen between veterinarians and the general public or non-EEA regulatory authorities and general public. Governance. I have a lot of slides on those, and so I think I need to crack on a bit on that, but it's basically very simple. The top decision-making body on the IT projects to be delivered under the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation Program is the EMA Management Board. The EMA and the Management Board is supported or informed is the EU Telematics Management Board and the IT Directors Executive Committee. But they also have observers on the lower level governance structure, which is the coordination group, which really has members from the Commission. It's actually chaired by the Commission, member states and the EMA. And wherever there are conflicts or things to resolve, this coordination group will prepare the decision for the EMA Management Board. You see the currently active programs underneath. Each of them is governed by a project group. We have the EVVET3 project group. EVVET3 is the EMA internal name for the Union Pharmacovigilance database, because it is building on the third iteration of the EV Veterinary program. And we have the Union Product Database, or UPD project group. Both projects are supported by one stakeholder group, and each project has its own product owners group. Now we go into more detail on the next slide. One combined stakeholder group, which meets quarterly and provides input on the development of the IT systems, but we don't have separate stakeholder groups for the individual databases. I think we can skip those slides. You can basically see the description of the individual groups that I basically already gave to you. So it's for you to read when you get home. Important is this relation of the product owners group to the UPD project group. Now, the product owners under the IT system development are basically the users that set out the user requirements. So basically, they are the people who tell, who say, or who define what needs to be in the system. Sometimes they run into questions, or sometimes there are larger questions like questions we already addressed in this talk today. What about submission of dossiers, keeping dossiers updated? And these larger themes are then discussed at the UPD and the EVVET3 project groups, and we give advice back to the product owners group. But basically, the product owner group are the people who drive the development of the IT systems. Again, the description of what we do. Project updates. Where are we at? Basically, at the time when I submitted the presentation, given that both systems work in 2 week development sprints, I hope we're already a bit further on. You can this is another picture of showing how we see the different databases working with one another. This is the system overview over the Union Pharmacovigilance database, or EVVET3. We have one module called Access Management that really defines on who can have access to which system. And then there is a basic data submission functionality, and there are the underlying processes, like the pharmacovigilance processes, that allow for signal management or the recording of pharmacovigilance inspections outcomes. And the EVVet portal that draws out information from the submitted data as required by the regulations for the information of the general public, that analyzes the data and therefore provides some information on incidents, or sorts the data so one can search by data, adverse events by product, by country, and data can also be exported through that function. And underlying, of course, is the data repository that records the data, but also allows data quality validation and, for instance, identification of duplicates, that provides for document history and for document management. And what we call MVP is the minimum viable product. That is the IT system that needs to be delivered in January 2022. And for the pharmacovigilance database, that is actually defined in Regulation 2019-6 and the associated implementing acts on the Pharmacovigilance System Master File and on good pharmacovigilance practice. Additional functionality can become during the further development of the system after delivery of the minimum viable product, so the things that we must have. Challenges are related to the technology. The one used in EVVet 2 is no longer supported, so a lot needs to be changed. We need to implement agreed international standards as elaborated by VICH, and the architecture role challenge is that EVVet, Ultravigilance, Human and Veterinary, while they serve similar purposes, remain separate entities and with separate levels of instruments at this point in time, and that we hope to address by the development to EVVet 3 to integrate these platforms. So in the end, we hope for a reliable and stable system that's in compliance with the regulation, in compliance with international requirements, that allows for an upgraded signal detection process and is compatible with all major web browsers and integrated with access management developed by the agency, the SPOR system I mentioned before, and the data warehouse with the aim of overall improving data quality. And public access to EVVet 3 data, we hope will reduce workload related to access to documents. Most of our questions currently come for adverse events for centrally authorized products. EVVet 3 started even before the regulation was published. Analysis and design were completed in 2018, and the first implementation has already been completed. For instance, the public website of existing adverse events is already available and live for centrally authorized products. And of course, the timeline, we mentioned it before in 2020, January 2022, there is the go live of the new system that seeks to adapt the common messaging platform, data warehouse, and EV Web by the end of this year or early next year. And then in the course of the next year, look at integration with the Union product database, and data quality and analysis and reporting. The next step for EVVET3, that was, I think, as of September, was really to complete the parser integration, so how the messages are handled and translated into the database speak that is compliant with the ICH, the development of the EV web component, and that's basically the user interface for the general public, prepare the data warehouse and reports for VICH compliance, and but we have to say an upgraded system will not go live this year. It will actually only come in the course of the next year.
Barbara, sorry to interrupt. There is a question, and I'm not sure it has been addressed, about access from countries outside the EEA to these databases. So what's the level of access will be?
Yeah, I thought I already addressed that. And basically, the access to the databases for regulators from outside the EEA will be the same as for the general public. But that is already a significant amount of information. So it might require further discussion on what sort of information would be desired. So you can get the product, the active substance, the strength, the SPCs, the EPAs, and product information leaflet, as well as product labeling. You can get all that information from the Union product database. However, no access to the process-related information or to any variations that might have been submitted. Only what has been approved will immediately be displayed in the Union product database.
Okay, thanks. And just a gentle reminder that we have that we will have to close in 15 minutes.
Yes, and I hope to be done by then. I'll run quickly through the Union product database, but I think that one is of key interest to everyone. Again, it's a similar structure to the system I showed for EVVET3. It has one extra box here, and that's the approval import, where variations not requiring assessment will need to be approved by the national competent authority or the European Commission. And that has to be recorded in the UPD portal. So marketing authorization holders register or record the change, and NCAs or the Commission have to approve it or reject it. And that all needs to be recorded in the database. The data repository, which allows for data recording, validation, and document history, and document management, which is probably a larger component for the UPD than it is for EVVET3. Again, the same as before, we will have a minimum viable product that really meets the requirement of the regulation and the related implementing act, and nothing more. And that will require improvement of the functionality over time. And we're beginning to schedule already the future developments. Our key issue for the UPD is, even though we do have Butapharm, I realize that, there is no authoritative single source of information of veterinary medicinal products authorized in the EU. And we aim to address that with the UPD. There is a lack of interoperability between systems and the regulatory authorities across the EU. And the same information is entered multiple times into several systems in different formats. And there is no easy public access to information on all veterinary medicinal products. And of course, the requirements of the new regulation are not covered by existing systems. So we aim to address that with the new database. One central database giving authoritative access to information on all veterinary medicinal products in the EU. And that includes not only authorized veterinary medicines, but also registered veterinary homeopathics. It includes parallel traded veterinary medicines and medicines allowed for use in pets. It will manage variations requiring assessment, and we do hope transparency to the public through a public portal, and access management will also be suitably addressed by what we're building. The project started at the beginning of the year. Actually, we started a bit earlier, but we set up the governance before the beginning of the year, and we started taking decisions since January. We have a project vision agreed, and development in the agile methodology is pressing forward, meaning you have very short development periods on very specific issues. Actually, I'm not sure it's in the timelines, but I can say that we're proud to report that the first version of the UPD is live, and member states within the EEA, I'm afraid, can have their own databases, talk to the UPD, and exchange information with it. Timeline. Yes, requirement analysis is actually ongoing until way into next year. Development of the data repository, that is the bit that just went live. Development of variations without assessment. We've had significant discussions already, but the tools to manage it will be developed as of next year. Data submission is ongoing. Access management, we just adopted the access policy, and the UPD portal has we begun developing just after the summer. And integration and provision of legacy data will be key tasks also in the course of the next year. So definition, development and testing for upload of legacy data has started at the beginning of the year and is still ongoing. Right, I just see there is one new question. The question is perhaps out of the scope of this presentation on veterinary medical devices. I don't, as far as I know, but now I'm not the specialist on human medical devices, but as far as I know, the medical device regulation does not address veterinary medicinal devices, but we can perhaps check after the training and get back to you by email. But to my knowledge, veterinary devices are not addressed in the medical device legislation. Right, I'm almost done. I think that is my last slide. The next steps in the UPD will really to focus on data repository and restricted areas of the user interface, meaning the bits that the regulatory authorities get to use and the bits that the industry gets to use. Current thinking is that those will be two different user interfaces, so there can be no confusion on who gets to use what. User research. What do stakeholders need? What do veterinarians want? So that we can ensure developing the solution that our stakeholders want. And then a key bit of work is the drafting of the EU Veterinary Implementation Guide, which tells regulators and industry alike which gives detailed guidance on the data elements that will be captured in the UPD, on associated business rules when information will be submitted in the database in order to ensure data quality. And then drafting of the UPD access policy, defining the appropriate access rights of different stakeholder groups. The Union Product Database Project Group had a look at the revised policy, and I think this one is going to be adopted before the year is out. And I think, well, no, just a few words on project change. I mentioned what we are doing at the agency. I already mentioned that that member states also need to do work, and that is what we're trying to support through the change management process. And the aim is really to help member states in implementing what they need to do to provide us with the data, how they need to change their systems. And again, we can't do it for member states, but we can support them in that. So the involvement in change management is the coordination group, the heads of medicines agency task force on the implementation of the veterinary medicines regulation will coordinate the change for the national competent authorities, and the stakeholder group will coordinate, is our channel of information to industries and the veterinarians. And so as a next step for that, we hope for an implementation plan that describes the detail of the change management, and we hired someone earlier this month to do just that. Now I'm at the end of my presentation, and we have about 8 minutes for questions. I saw there is one more question, but I'm not sure whether it's whether that is for me. It's a question in relation to the withdrawal period. Maybe you can elaborate on that one. I think. Okay, the withdrawal period for medicinal products used outside the terms of the marketing authorization. That is actually laid down in Regulation 2019/6 in a number of different articles. I can send you the specific references to that, but I believe there are still standard withdrawal periods that apply when medicines are used outside the terms of the marketing authorization in food-producing animals. Are there any other questions?
Okay. If there is no other question, we can close here. I just want to say a big thank you to Barbara for this very interesting and comprehensive presentation, and I also want to say thank you again to the participants for asking so many questions, for being so active. The idea of this training was to have an interactive sort of training, and I have to say that so far it has been very successful in this respect. So thank you very much. We have a last webinar in half an hour on maximum residue limits, and with this we have finished. So we will reconvene in 35 minutes. Again, thank you to Barbara and to all the participants. Dear colleagues, welcome to the last webinar of this training on maximum residue limits. In a minute, I will be very happy to give the floor to my colleague Sébastien Giraud from the Evaluation and Innovative Support Departments in the Veterinary Medicines Divisions at EMA. Before I do, I would just like to remind everyone, in particular who just joined and didn't follow the webinars before, that if you have any question at any moment, you can put it in the chat box, on the WebEx application. So with this, I give the floor to Sebastian, who will guide us through this important topic, maximum residual limits. Sebastian, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I work in the veterinary medicines division. I focus on safety issues. Yes, I focus on safety issues, especially consumer safety and MRLs, maximum residual limits. And I'm going to present you the maximum residual limits in the European Union. This is an overview of the presentation. We will start with the definition, the objectives, and the legal basis of the MRLs. What are the MRLs? What they are used for? We will see briefly the procedure for the establishment of MRLs in the European Union and the different outcomes, the possible outcomes of this procedure. There will be a point on the data submitted and the principle of the assessment. I will speak about consumer safety in marketing authorization because while the MRL procedure is a procedure different from the procedure of marketing authorization, the consideration of consumer safety is very important when we assess the consideration of MRLs is very important when we assess the consumer safety in the marketing authorization. And I will have a slide on the information that is made publicly available on the website of the EMA. Definition of the maximum residual limits. It's the maximum concentration of a residue of a pharmacologically active substance which may be permitted in food of animal origin. This definition is given by the Regulation 470/2009. It's the main European regulation on the MRLs. When an animal, a food-producing animal, is treated by a veterinary medicine, the active substance will distribute into the body of the animal. And at the time of the production of foodstuff, for example, the meat, the milk, or the eggs, there will be some remainings, some residues of the substance in this meat, milk, or eggs. And the maximum residual limit, it's a maximum concentration of residue which is allowed in this foodstuff. Principles and objectives of the MRLs. The main objective is to ensure consumer safety. The MRLs must be set at a level which is safe for the consumer. We do not want the consumer to take a risk. The establishment of the MRLs is a precondition for marketing authorization for veterinary medicinal products for food-producing animals. It means that if there is no MRLs for the pharmacologically active substance, the marketing authorization cannot be granted. MRLs are used to establish withdrawal periods within the marketing authorization procedures. At the end of the withdrawal period, the concentration of residues should be lower than the MRLs, or at the maximum equal to the MRL. The MRLs are also used for residue surveillance by the member states. At the time of the control, again, the measured concentration of residues should be lower than the MRL. The MRL also facilitates trade. It avoids barriers to free movements of foodstuff of animal origin within the EU. This is because all the member states will use the same MRL, so they will use the same value, the same rules. Legal basis of the MRLs. as I was saying, the main MRL regulation is 470/2009. It defines procedures for the establishment of MRLs. Another important regulation is 37/2010. This one lists in alphabetical order the substance for which MRL have been established. And we will see an extract in a later slide. There are three other European regulations on the MRLs. All of them are very recent. You see on the slide 2017, 2018, and all of them are referring to 470/2009. The first one is about the form and the content of the application. It is about the structure of the dossier that has to be submitted. The second one is on the extrapolation of MRLs to other species or foodstuff. And the last one is an important one, the regulation establishing methodological principles for risk assessment and risk management. It explains how the assessment has to be made, and it gives also very valuable information about what has to be submitted. Regulatory and procedural aspects. An application for the establishment of MRLs is a standalone centralized procedure. It's not part of an application for a marketing authorization. So it means that on one side, we have the MRL application, and on the other side, we have the marketing authorization application. The scientific evaluation for all the MRL applications are performed by the EMAS Committee for Medicinal Products for Veterinary Use. It's the CVMP. It means that all the procedures for MRLs are centralized. The procedure itself contains a number of points or steps. Only the most important ones are mentioned here. The rapporteurs are appointed at the beginning. The conformity of the dossier is checked by the EMA. It's what we call the validation. And the rapporteurs will assess the data and produce an assessment report. The other CVMP members will comment. The regulation specifies a 210-day evaluation period. And to this period, we will add the clock stops. When questions are asked to the applicant, the clock is stopped to allow the applicant to prepare the answers. So 210 days is the day to make the assessment, the period during which the rapporteurs and the CVMP will make the assessment, and the clock stop is the time during which the applicant will answer to the questions. And at the end of the assessment, the CVMP will adopt an MRL opinion. Here is an overview of the process. What we have seen already is in blue or in purple. Assessment by the CVMP, adoption of a scientific opinion. After that, the opinion will be sent to the European Commission, and the European Commission, in consultation with the member states, will adopt the MRLs, and the MRLs will be published in the official journal. Once the MRL is published, and it's published in the form of a regulation, the MRLs will be applicable in all the member states. There are two possible outcomes of the evaluation, either a positive or a negative outcome. If it is a positive opinion, the substance will be included in the list of allowed substances. It's the table 1 of Regulation 37/2010 that we will see on the next slide. In the details, there are several possible cases. We can have numerical MRLs established. In this case, the numerical values will be entered into the table. or we can have provisional numerical MRLs. It means that we have still numerical MRLs, which will be entered, but they are provisional because there are some outstanding issues, usually related to the validation of the analytical method. Or numerical MRLs are not required for the protection of public health. In this case, it is concluded that there is no need to have numerical MRLs to protect the consumer, and the entry in the table will be no MRL required. If the opinion is negative, the substance will be included in the list of prohibited substances. It's the table 2 of the same regulation. No MRLs are established because any presence of residues may constitute a hazard to the consumer. It could be, for example, the case of a genotoxic carcinogenic substance. There is no threshold. It's not possible to establish a safe dose, so the substance is prohibited. Or it can be because no final conclusion concerning the effect can be drawn because there is not enough data to conclude. Here is an extract of the table 1, the table of allowed substances. You see only the first lines of the table because it's a very long table. It's more than 70 pages, more than 700 substances. So you have only the first lines here. The first column is on the pharmacologically active substance. The substances are ranked here by alphabetical order. First one is abamectin. Second column is the marker residue. The marker residue is a marker substance which is measured by the analytical method. Then we have the animal species, because it can be that a substance is authorized for a species but not for another species. We have a column on the MRL. You can see there the numerical values of the MRLs. It's a concentration. It's expressed in microgram per kilogram of tissue or food commodity. And you have in the column target tissues to which tissue this MRL, this numerical MRL applies to. Sometimes we can have in the MRL column no MRL required. You see the case for acetylcysteine. No numerical MRLs was necessary here, so the entry is no MRL required. In the column other provisions, we can find some restrictions here. For example, not for use in animals from which milk is produced for human consumption. We can have the same kind of sentence for the eggs. Or we can have some restriction on the route of administration, for example. We can have other restrictions as well. And the last column is on the therapeutic classification. Here is the table 2, so the table of prohibited substances. This time it's not an extract, it's the whole table that you see on the slide. So it's a very short list, less than 10 substances. In most cases, the substances were included in this list of prohibited substances because of genotoxicity or carcinogenicity issues, or because there was not enough data. May I ask the audience if there are some questions at these steps, because we have seen a large part of the regulatory aspects already.
Please feel free to ask any question to Sébastien. I understand everyone is tired by now, but this is your chance to speak to an expert and to ask questions.
I will now go back to more scientific or technical sides, the data submitted and the principle of the assessment. In the dossier submitted, we have a safety file, a residue file, and some proposal for MRLs. In the safety file, we will have some pharmacodynamic studies, some pharmacokinetic studies. We will have a full range of toxicology studies, repeat dose toxicity in rodent and non-rodent by oral route. We will have reproduction and developmental studies, genotoxicity, carcinogenicity studies. We can have also some special toxicity studies like neurotoxicity or immunotoxicity. We can have some microbiological studies as well. The objective of the safety file is to establish an acceptable daily intake, ADI. The acceptable daily intake, it's the estimate of the amount of residues that can be ingested daily over a lifetime without appreciable health risk to exposed individuals. So we can say it's a safe dose in humans. If we take the toxicology studies, we will consider the lowest NOEL of them. The NOEL is the no observed adverse effect level. It's the highest dose tested in a tox studies, which does not induce any adverse effect. There will be many toxicity studies. Ideally, all the in vivo toxicity studies will have a NOEL. We will take the lowest of them, and we will divide by an uncertainty factor to extrapolate the acceptable daily intake to humans. The uncertainty factor is very often 100, but it can be another value depending on the data available and of the nature of the effects.
There is a question. I don't know if you want to take it.
Yes, I will take it just afterwards if it's okay. Thank you. In the safety file, we have pharmacological studies, toxicological studies, and we can have microbiological studies. So at the end, we will have a pharmacological ADI, a toxicological ADI, and possibly a microbiological ADI. And again, we will take the lowest one of them, which will be the overall ADI. And the fact to select the lowest value goes into the direction of the safety for the consumer, obviously. So I see a question. What is the opinion of the EMA for the reference points of action for chloramphenicol? In fact, the EMA is not in charge of the reference points of action. The reference points of action are not MRLs. The reference points of actions are, in the case of, for example, the forbidden substances, the value above which there will be a non-compliance when controls are made by the member states. But the reference points of action are, in fact, established by the European Commission, not by the EMA. So I don't have an opinion on the reference points of action for the chloramphenicol. Some other points taken into account in the establishment of MRLs. The CVMP takes into account the relevant findings of other European or international scientific bodies. It takes also account the exposure to different sources. For example, the same substance could be used as the active substance of a veterinary medicinal product and as a pesticide in a plant protection product. In this case, the same consumer may be exposed to these two sources of exposure. That's why we will, when we are establishing the MRLs, we will not use 100% of the acceptable daily intake, because a part of this acceptable daily intake will already be used by the plant protection product. So it's something that the CVMP has to take into account when establishing MRLs for substance to be used in veterinary medicinal product. Consultation of European reference laboratories regarding the analytical method. There are several European reference laboratories. All of them are specialists in analytical methods, and each of them is specialist in a specific group of substance. So we consult the relevant reference laboratory when we assess the analytical method used for the residues, the residue studies. The CVMP also has to consider the possibility for extrapolation of MRLs to other food-producing species or food commodities. This is addressed in the regulation 2017-880 on MRL extrapolation. For example, if the application is for an MRL for bovine, the CVMP will obviously assess the MRLs for bovine, but the CVMP will also consider the possibility to extrapolate this MRL to, for example, sheep or goats or other animal species. MRLs versus marketing authorization procedure. It's a slide to make a quick comparison between the MRL procedure and the marketing authorization procedure. In general, the MRL procedure is very similar to the marketing authorization centralized procedure. The assessment is made by the rapporteur, the CVMP. The opinion is given after 210 days of assessment at maximum. However, there are some differences. The MRLs is on the substance, while the marketing authorization is on the product. MRLs are always centralized, while marketing authorization can be centralized, national, decentralized, by mutual recognition. There is no benefit risk for the MRLs. No benefit risk ratio is considered for the MRLs because first, there is no real benefit. There is no benefit for the consumer to be exposed to residues of antibiotics, for example. And there is not a real risk either because we do not want the consumer to take a risk. So we do not consider a benefit-risk ratio for the MRLs, contrary to the marketing authorization, where the consideration of the benefit-risk ratio is something very important. MRLs are done before the marketing authorization. The directive says at least 6 months between the MRL application and the marketing authorization application. Ideally, we work first on the MRLs and second on the marketing authorization. Now, there can be an overlap between these two procedures, but as long as the MRL has not been established and published, the marketing authorization cannot be granted. And at the end, the Commission will deliver a regulation for the MRLs. Consumer safety assessment in the marketing authorization. Until now, I was speaking in the context of the MRL application, except my previous slides about the comparison between MRLs and marketing authorization. Now, in the current slides, I'm speaking in the context of the marketing authorization. The consumer safety in the marketing authorization is based on the MRL classification of each constituent and on the withdrawal period of the veterinary medicinal product, if needed. The MRL classification, each active substance and excipient in the medicinal product for food-producing animals needs to have an MRL classification. The substance can be included in the table 1, the table of allowed substance, or it can be that the substance does not fall within the scope of the MRL regulation. It's the case of the active substance of vaccines. The active substance of immunological products in general are exempted from the MRL regulation. It can be also some excipients that have been included in what we call the out-of-scope list. This is a list of non-pharmacologically active substances, which is maintained by the agency. And we regularly receive some requests to include a new substance on this list. This is done after assessment by the CVMP. We can find a lot of excipients in this list. It can be also that the excipients are considered as out of scope during the assessment of the marketing authorization. In this case, the excipient will be concluded as acceptable, but in the restrictive context of a specific marketing authorization. It's not frequent, but it may happen. Or there can be a last possibility, which is very recent, is that the substance is a biological substance which is included in the list of biological substances not requiring an MRL evaluation. This is a possibility that is foreseen by the last MRL regulation, the one of 2018. So there is now such a list of biological substances not requiring MRL evaluation, which is published on the website of the agency. It has been published this year. The list is for now very short because it's very new, but it will be populated when we have some new requests and new assessment on this kind of substances. So I see a question. Should some product be authorized if active ingredient is listed in table 1 or depend on the concentration or the form of use? Okay. It depends on the entry in the table 1, especially on the column of the other provision. If in the column on other provision, you have written something like not applicable, it means that there is no restriction, so you can use the substance in the species indicated. It does not depend on the concentration or the formulation, if it is a spray, a shampoo, or something else. But for some of the substances, there are some restrictions in this column on other provision. It can be a restriction on the route of administration. For example, some substances have an MRL or are no MRL required, but so they are authorized in the table, but only for cutaneous or topical administration, for example. Some others only for oral administration. You have to look at the entry in the column other provisions for that. The information on MRLs, which is made publicly available by the EMA, in addition to the out-of-scope list and the list of biological substances that I have mentioned before. You can find a lot of information on the agency's website. You can access to it from the MRL webpage. You will find some general documentation on the procedural aspects. There are a lot of scientific guidelines available. And you can find also some specific documentation. I mean, documentation specific to a substance. These are the outcome of the MRL assessment. Once an MRL opinion is adopted, we publish the summary opinion on the website, pending the decision from the Commission. And once the MRL has been adopted by the Commission and the MRL has been published in the official journal, we will publish on the EMA website the MRL opinion and the European Public MRL Assessment Report. So the MRL opinion, it's a two-page document. It's very short, and the European Public MRL Assessment Report, it's about 12 or 15-page document. It's a summary of the assessment. So if you want to know just the outcome, you can look at the opinion, and if you want to see the assessment, you will read the EPMAR. I see a question on data protection. What is the duration of data protection for the marketing authorization holders after establishing of a maximum residue limits for an active substance based on marketing authorization holders' proprietary studies? Is this period prolonged if new species and/or tissues are added? I don't have a clear answer to this question at the moment. The question on data protection are very complex, and they are being changed or will be changed with the new veterinary regulation. So it's something that is under discussion in the context of the new veterinary regulation.
There is also a sort of question which implies a little criticism about, on EMA. It says that unfortunately on EMA's website is not clear system in IPMAR's summary reports. Please, could it be possible to change it? Do you want to clarify or to explain why? Yeah.
Thank you to draw my attention on this question. So the summary of assessment are currently called the European Public MRL Assessment Report. In the old times, it was called summary reports. So for many substances that were assessed a long time ago, the wording that you will see on the website is a summary report, and it's the title of this report. Could it be possible to change it? I may not be in the position to change that, but perhaps it could be developed in which direction a change.
Well, let's say we would be happy to receive suggestion on it, and or at least to understand why the system is not clear. Maybe some more details would help us to consider it.
In the way the documents, the publicly available documents appear on the website is likely to be improved in the near future. I don't know if it will answer specifically this issue, but it's planned to change a little the way the document appear on the website. Yes. In conclusion, I will say that MRLs are to ensure consumer safety. I think it's the main point. We want to ensure the safety of the consumer. MRLs are a precondition for marketing authorization for veterinary medicinal products for food-producing animals. If there is no MRL for the pharmacologically active substance, there is no marketing authorization. The MRLs are established at the European level only and are directly applicable in all member states. But the responsibility for monitoring residues in foodstuff of animal origin lies with the competent authorities of the member states. So the establishment of the MRLs is made centrally by the CVMP. Now the use of the MRLs for the controls, for the monitoring of the residues, is made by the controlling authorities of the member states. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sébastien. I will give a minute for any further question, and then we close the webinar. It looks like there is no further questions. So we close the webinar, and with the webinar we also close the training as this was the last one. So I would like to thank very much Sébastien for this interesting presentation. I want to say that as a concluding remark, that the aim of this training was to have an interactive discussion, and I think this was achieved. A little bit less in this last webinar, but I can understand that after 2 busy days, everyone is tired. It was a lot of information which was shared in these 2 days. I also would like to remind everyone that this is the first training organized for candidate countries and potential candidates in the context of the instrument of pre-accession. It will be followed by another one. So for this training, it was a basic level, so no previous knowledge was assumed. Then the next one will be more advanced. We're planning to have case studies and a lot more details. But and it will be done by a date that hasn't been already yet established, but we will do it by the first quarter of next year, first quarter of 2021. So with this, I really close. Again, thank you to everyone, to the speakers, but to the participants too, because of the very active participation. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again at the next training. Bye-bye.